having a good day? Okay. So I just want to give first an overview of the courses at Three Rivers and how this translates into what we're doing with the 096 course and some problems that I can anticipate people having with the instruction in their classes. The first thing that I want to mention is that we had a pretty extended program of reading and writing separated out, and now it's fully integrated. And we're having some trouble because we have to take a lot of part-time faculty and teach them how to teach an integrated course and not lower the rigor of the course. And the concern is that people will teach the 096 class at too low of a level and then pass students into college composition before they're ready. Because the mandate by the state is that students leave English 096 and go right into English 101. And that's a really big job. So I want to talk a little bit about the context of the courses and the history, a little bit about the current 096 class that we're piloting, and about what the concerns are for the future. And for those of you who do not teach English, I have some handouts about how to design some writing assignments in your classes to help scaffold the reading and writing instruction. And I also have a copy of our lesson plans so that you can see how we move students through the sequence. So even if you do teach English, and some of this is refresher for you, if you're doing advising, you can have a better sense of how to work with the students. So just to start, I'll just mention that we have 3 levels of ESOL for students who don't speak English as their native language. The 3rd level is a writing and speaking course to help students be able to speak more effectively in their classes. I don't know, do most of you have ESOL students in your sections? Do you ever feel like you're surprised when you speak with the students, that then when you look at their writing, that their writing is a little bit better than their speaking? Or vice versa, right? So it tends to be a problem because oftentimes those students are some of the best students, but they really need language acquisition. And so they're in a situation where they understand how to think critically. They're really motivated students, but then they can't write that effectively. So all of these students in the past were funneled into a course called 094. And 094 was an integrated reading and writing class. It was 4 credits, and it funneled students into English 100, which was kind of like a short, condensed composition class at a lower level, basically. So students worked up to a sort of 5-paragraph essay model and a little bit beyond, but the idea was to get them used to integrated resources. So this was the old curriculum, and what we found was that there was not enough instructional time in a 4-credit integrated course. So what we did was we expanded the program to 2 classes leading into English 100. And those 2 classes were 002, which is a reading course, and 012, which is a writing course. And the reading course was all about reading comprehension and helping students work through textbook understandings and source material and to make sure that they could comprehend what they're reading and monitor their comprehension, etc. There were a whole series of tests and quizzes in that class. And then in English 012, we were really focused on the sentence to the paragraph to the short essay. So in English 012, students only write 1 essay and it's a first-person draft. We spend a lot of time on sentence structure, a lot of time on essay or paragraph building, topic sentences, supporting details, etc. So as you can imagine, the students coming in at these 2 classes, especially from ESOL and also even lower levels, some of them really struggle to write a basic sentence, even a simple sentence. Understanding how to write a topic sentence in a paragraph and then support that with details is a very difficult concept sometimes to explain to these students. We're looking at 6, 7, 8 weeks of instructional time just to get them to write a paragraph, and that's with intensive instruction. We would teach grammar more formally in the class, but also in the context of their writing. And then students had several times to go through these courses if they needed to repeat them before going into English 100, which again was a course designed to get them ready for college composition. English 100 was credit bearing, so students got 3 courses towards their graduation as elective credit. Then we had the PA 1240 legislation, which asked us and required us to condense everything into 1 class. And so we were left with English 096. And across the state, we decided to do 1 course, which is Introduction to College Composition, or College English, I think, and it is an integrated course. So now we were asking all of our faculty for fall to start teaching their classes by integrating the reading, writing, speaking, critical thinking, and information literacy, which is a lot in 6 credits. So when we start the class, we give students a bit of an overview. We talk with them about, as readers, they have to find research and be able to read it effectively and comprehend what they're reading, which is, in and of itself, can be very challenging. So we have a series of 6 weeks where students find one source a week. They staple it and annotate it fully, and they make sure that they're monitoring their comprehension and reading it well. Then we have the writing and speaking aspect of it, where students are asked to question their values, beliefs, and assumptions about the world as they shape their worldview, which is also a very complex, process. It's a higher level order of thinking there. And they're doing that because they ultimately need to write a thesis, and you can't write an effective thesis to a mildly dissenting audience if you don't understand your intended audience. So we also have to get them to understand the concept of audience when designing their papers. They write 4 papers and they lead up to a persuasive essay to an audience that disagrees with them. So they have to profile themselves as thinkers and writers, and also their audiences, and be able to vary their tone to effectively communicate to that group. The critical thinking piece is another whole set of skills that we have to weave into the instruction. So we have to walk students through the phase of analysis, synthesis, and evaluation so that they can process the material, so that they're not simply going onto a computer, logging onto the library site, finding articles, cutting and pasting into a document, and plagiarizing. That's what is too rampant in the college level writing classes often. So we have students sit with the material. We do webs with them where we analyze the scope of the issues, we synthesize between ideas and get them to make connections between text-to-text readings, etc. And then they evaluate ultimately by writing a thesis and then arguing that point. But again, I'd like to emphasize that all of the students in these 3 classes are now funneled into this one-room schoolhouse. And in this class, we have students who are entering in who can barely write a sentence, who can barely write a paragraph. About 70% of the students, Marcy and I estimated, about 70% of the students have no concept how to write an effective paragraph upon entering English 096. Go ahead.
My question is, so they get college level credit for this?
No, it's not credit bearing at all. The old English 100
I'm confused by the 6 credit integrated.
Well, they pay for 6 credits, but it doesn't count.
But they don't get
They don't get in terms of graduation, absolutely, right. And so, we have to make sure that we can scaffold the reading and writing and critical thinking instruction for students at all different levels. And that's not to mention all the non-cognitive issues that students struggle with. Like, can they sit effectively, can they sit in a seat and pay attention? Can they take notes? Do they know how to take notes? Do they have behavioral problems? Do they have learning disabilities? Do they have personality issues that they're struggling with? Do they question authority too much? Do they have PTSD? What are all these issues that we all struggle with these students? So it's a huge, huge challenge, and it's a ton of stuff to try to organize. The library skills, we're really trying to get students prepped for college composition because they have to do an annotated bibliography in college composition, and they have to write an 8 to 10 page research essay. So again, I just want to emphasize that what we are charged with this legislation is in 15 weeks to move the most basic and novice writers to an expert of the high school curriculum of 12th grade to get them ready for college composition. And we're talking again about students who are coming in with a whole host of learning challenges and very low level of reading and writing instruction. So this is what we had to cut. We had to cut 8 reading tests. We had to cut a lot of reading quizzes. We had to cut about 75% of our reading instruction at the basic level. So our reading instruction now is mostly at the higher level, analyzing sources and monitoring their comprehension through research materials and their textbooks through journals. That's a tremendous amount of material. So if you have a student who struggles with an 8th grade paragraph, which is basically topic, sentence, and maybe a few details, but in that one paragraph, there's only one line of thought going through, they're not shifting detail. Students are struggling there, we're then asking them to go find a scholarly academic journal and know to identify the delayed thesis statement, right? That's a huge shift that we're asking them to do. So that's a little bit of context of where we are and what the expectation is of the legislation. In the course, we have, I'll just skip over here for 1 second. Sorry, Ken. In the class, in 002 we did reading comprehension, in 012 it was sentence skills and grammar, leading to paragraph structure over a 12-week period, and then 3 weeks up to one brief essay. And then in English 100 it was all essays. And here we have to teach the grammar in context, and we do have an in-class tutor, which is great. But this is what the new course is, basically, in a nutshell. And I will give you guys a copy of the lesson plans that are detailed week by week of everything that's expected. They're doing 4 essays They start out with narrative, which is first person, pretty basic. The compare and contrast essay is text to text. They're comparing and contrasting two texts. And then that's really for a reading assessment. Then they're picking a socio-political topic to do a brief annotated bibliography where they're summarizing, analyzing, and reflecting. And then that topic is then turned into a persuasive essay. So again, if you tell a student coming in who can't really write a paragraph, that in the next 15 weeks you're going to write 4 papers leading up to a 900 to 1,200 word essay, that is a huge shift. So what we've done is we've designed a portfolio class. So every student gets to rewrite the first 3 papers 2 times. The first time if they don't hand it in late, they can revise it for a higher grade. The second time is for their portfolio. So every single student in the class, no matter where they start, has 2 times to revise each essay with a tutor to make sure it's more effective. But please note that that indicates that the instructors are grading 3 times more work, right, than they would have graded, because we're looking at, all these essays and all these drafts. But it's really the only way to ensure that the lowest level student, the middle level students, and the highest level students are all learning. There are 9 journals. They have college level critical thinking questions in them. Summary, commentary, analysis is expected, which means we have to scaffold those skills throughout the semester. Students have to understand how to write a summary, how to give critical commentary about it, and then how to analyze if it was effective. And then there are quizzes, a midterm, a portfolio, and an exit exam. So I hope you guys have an appreciation for how rigorous this course is with those students' populations who are coming in. But here's the challenge. We are told with the legislation that students have to leave 096 and go right into college comp. And Joe, you can probably attest to this. If students don't have these basic skills, how could they ever be successful in college composition, right? So then we're stuck with, what do we do with the students who aren't going to pass? And the course is designed with enough flexibility with that in mind, so that if students repeat the course, in the spring semester we'll have a whole different set of readings for them, a whole different midterm, a whole different final, and instructors can take them where they were and then advance them to the next stage, and on 3rd time they can do it again. So there's a lot of flexibility in the course, but think about what you're asking instructors to do. You're asking for expert area in the areas of reading, writing, speaking, critical thinking, and information literacy. You're asking people to be experts in developmental pedagogy and to be able to navigate that space in a classroom with 20 students who are all at drastically different levels. And if you're doing that with people that you're ending up having to hire at the last minute and train at the last minute, it can be very, very difficult. So what the English department did was a series of training for the adjuncts. We also have all the text and materials. Everything will be on a flash drive for them electronically. All of the papers, the peer reviews, and all of the rubrics for every single assignment are spelled out. But we did also keep some space for instructor autonomy. So you probably want to know why I asked you to come here. It's not just to tell you about our course. It's really because I want to talk to you about some of the challenges. The challenges will be the instructors who are teaching, who are part-time faculty, who have to do this huge task, and at the end, they're left with 3 to 5 students in the class. And they're wondering, I have to pass these students. I can't have every one of my students fail, right? We're looking at about a 50% dropout rate by the midterm, maybe roughly. Of those 50%, we're looking at about half of those students might pass. So we have to build confidence in our part-time faculty to say it's okay to not pass the students, because the course is designed for when they retake it for them to do better. We want to retain them as long as we can, and then let them get more chances to build those skills within one class.
So how many times are they allowed to retake this?
I believe 3 right now. I'm not sure if the 3rd time if they still get financial aid or not.
It's a
but I
course.
believe 3.
It's a course and it's bound by all the other requirements of every course. So you can take it.
So they can only
twice.
retake it twice?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Based on the piloting that you've done thus far, what percentage of students that have failed have indeed taken it a second time?
I'm not sure yet. I know that Jody's gathering all that material. They're doing statewide assessment of the programs. I can tell you that the spring semester has been much, much harder because we have a much bigger group of people who didn't pass who are retaking the class, which is always typically happens in the spring semester, I think, but we're seeing a much lower percentage of students passing this semester than who passed in the fall.
I just wonder what the frustration was.
Well, absolutely. Students, and so what we ended up doing was we delayed most of the grading until the middle and end point of the semester. We made the midterm grade worth only 10%, so they can see a snapshot of how they're doing. and we can encourage them to revise, but the 60% of the grade is determined at the end. Because if we're encouraging them to have to repeat the course a couple times to get them ready, they have to complete the whole course so they can see it in its entirety. It doesn't serve anyone to drop out the first 3 weeks two times, then the third time they take it, they drop out after 8 weeks. So again, it's a big challenge. But the reason I wanted to talk with you guys is about in your own classes, what are you going to do in a year and a half when these students get through this program? Because there will be students who pass through this program who are not prepared, who will go into your 100 level classes, who probably shouldn't be ready for college comp, but they'll get in there. They're not supposed to go into the embedded support class. So what I really wanted to talk with you about is how do we support those students? We do an exit exam, and we ask the faculty to all come together and we grade the exit exams with a pass or fail to let the faculty members know whether the students should move on. But the faculty has the final say. And oftentimes, I mean, you can imagine if you were teaching part-time and you had a large number of your students who weren't passing, there could be some feeling like maybe, a few of these students, well, suddenly a C looks a little different when most of your class is failing, right? Perhaps. So then what happens when those students move on? So,
Jen,
yes, go ahead.
could I ask you a little bit about the in-class tutoring? What does that look like? Who is it?
That's a great question. So we had Greg Souza as our in-class tutor this semester. So Greg's in my class about 4 hours a week, and it's really, really helpful. But there really isn't much funding to sustain that. We'll be lucky if instructors get 1 hour of in-class tutoring moving forward. And so we
1 hour a week.
1 hour a week. But again, you're looking at a lot of students. Most students get 30 minutes with a tutor, so most students would barely get a half an hour in the semester if it was just 1 hour a week.
What have you found works best? Have the tutor, in-class tutor, work with a small group or work with an individual?
Oh, well, with the in-class tutors, I move him around quite a bit. He does small group work, large group work. Once in a while, he'll do some presentations to the class. Oftentimes when students are drafting and composing and peer editing, he's walking around working with students one-on-one. So it's a whole host of things. And people use him in all different ways. And it's been really effective, mostly with the grammar instruction. But remember, we had to cut out so much grammar instruction here. We don't formally teach grammar like we would in the English 012 class. In English 012, they have a whole grammar workbook. They go through starting with subjects, and they go through comma usage, etc. Now we teach grammar in context. So we take their essays and put them on the document camera, and we edit them together, going over different skills and strategies. But that's about as much as we can cover with how much that we have to get done to get them prepped for college composition. Some might argue we should cut the narrative essay and get right into this writing because it has more of the structure of what English 101 requires. But I think it's too soon to ask students to not be reflecting and building a community of writers. I think we have to do a narrative in the beginning to get them comfortable writing about their lives as something that they're experts on. So we were very thoughtful about the instruction. We streamlined it as much as we possibly could. We cut about 60 to 70% of the content of these two classes because where students were going, but it is still sort of what it is. So the challenge is going to be to try to get the faculty at the college to do more with their writing instruction so that the students can graduate from Three Rivers and feel like they have an understanding of college level writing. I want you guys who teach the 100 level classes to know that students are only getting about 2 weeks of outlining instruction, and most of them do not know how to outline at all. And outlining is really a reading skill, right? So you're looking at, can a student differentiate major and minor details in a long passage and be able to use an alphanumeric outline to do that? That takes weeks and weeks and weeks to teach someone at this level. So if you guys are asking them to, with their book work, to outline something, you need to show them how to outline again and refresh them on that. If you want them to summarize something and attribute the writer, you have to remind them what a summary is and show them some context for how to write that summary. And you want to be careful about your language too. You don't want to tell them, I want to know your opinion, please analyze this piece. Because the student will think analysis is looking at how the writer shaped their piece for their intended audience, because that's really what analysis is. But sometimes people interchange commentary with analysis. So really what I want to talk about today is how you do your writing assignments. Do you do writing assignments? Where does that fit in, and what's the language you're using? So I did a handout for you guys that states summary directions. If you do want something summarized for them, what to give them. So instead of just saying, here, summarize this, you can just cut and paste this material, and I'll email all this to you guys as an electronic version. And also what commentary is and how to ask for it in writing. I gave an overview of analysis, and then I also gave a list of other tips that you guys can think of when you're shaping your writing instruction. Because what we don't want to happen when students get into these 100 level classes is for them to feel like they don't have a chance because the instructor's so overwhelmed with not knowing how to teach them from where they came into the class. And as you guys know, it's very difficult to get someone who passed a class with a C to go back and retake a developmental class just because you know they probably need it again. This is a copy of the lesson plan in case you're interested. Hello. I hope you're hungry. So let's just take a quick look at the back. There are a couple of writing tips, and then I just like to open it up for discussion for the end. Here, so again, it covers summary and commentary and analysis, but on the back where it says other tips, I would really encourage you guys in your classes, on the back of that handout, I'd really encourage you to consider using alphanumeric outlining when you guys are working with students through their writing assignments, so that they can kind of start having you scaffold for them some of those reading strategies and differentiating major and minor details. So if it applies in your classes where they have large amounts of content area, I'm sure in nursing, there are probably big chunks of text that students have to read. But probably by the time people get in the nursing department, they probably passed common with flying colors. But use
I don't know about with flying colors, but
Okay.
it is a requirement.
Yes, yes.
If you saw some of their papers, you wouldn't think it was
Yeah.
flying colors.
And so really what we're looking at is, can they outline? That's a skill they're going to need when they transfer. And we want to always, as much as we can, encourage students to move on to a bachelor's program. The second thing is to encourage reading strategy specifically. So if you hand out a large document of reading to them that they have to work through, encourage them to pre-read. Flip through the document, look at the article and see what it is. So sometimes in math, maybe they have anxiety because they're getting word problems. And you can sort of just get them to take a moment and pause and look at the whole test before they get started and, not just freeze, right? So understanding the difference between skimming and scanning. So if you're skimming, you're looking through the material. If you're scanning, you're trying to find one particular item. And that's an important thing to point out to them. Annotating is huge. Anything you guys assign your students, if you can get them to annotate with highlighting and marginal notes as they're reading, that's all reinforcing these skills that they may have missed. Same thing with writing strategies. So if you can, to the extent that you can, whenever you're assigning a writing assignment, please give them some space to do some pre-writing before they're composing. I'm not saying you have to do peer reviews in your class or anything like that, but give them some space to think about drafting. And here's a quick tip too. Anytime you're assigning writing, have the students not do a really formal edit until the very end if they're in college level classes, because why should they edit something that they're going to cut? So they should revise their paper first. They wrote a 10-page paper, they need to cut it down to 6. Don't have them edit 10 pages. Have them cut it down to 6 and then edit. It'll save them a lot of time. And they might not think of that as well. And then the other thing, which you guys can read this on your own, is just try to move beyond the 5-paragraph model and try to make sure that the content is what's driving the essay and not the form. So you just don't want to always encourage, thesis and 5 paragraphs supporting that thesis. You want to get the students to think critically and then write an essay that reflects their thoughts and not just a rigid structure. So that's my longer than quick overview of kind of where we are. What I'd really like to chat about today, though, is what your experiences are like in teaching writing. And if you can imagine a population that's not as prepared as what you have now, what challenges do you think you might face, and how can we in the English department help you? Any thoughts?
I think I like the most what you said about expectations and, not if a large percentage of your students appear to be like they're not going to finish, that the expectation shouldn't be, as an instructor, I need to do something else, or, I've got to find a way to make these students pass. If the expectation is that, it's not inconceivable that 25% of your students may be all that you get, that really helps the perspective, I think, a little bit. And also that they have an opportunity. If you even look at this a little bit as maybe this is a 2-semester course for many of the students, and that's not such a bad thing. It may take 2 semesters to really work through this material. And if you start off with that expectation, or not expectation, but possibility, that really might help, take some of the angst out as an instructor. Like, I'm doing something wrong because 75% of my students are either not here or they're failing. So that helps me.
Great. Brian, are you seeing similar numbers in math or students not passing?
Yeah, and particularly to talk about the expectations, these are things that we've had to deal with for much, much longer than you guys. And so that end of things is not usually an issue. For that, the numbers are about the same, right? 50% loss by halfway through, that's not enough. So we're not dealing with all different populations in this situation. I did have a question about, and this may sound weird coming from a math guy, but reading comprehension is such a big part of, at least how I do the math, right? Getting to understand and to. Do you have any specific suggestions that I can incorporate into the class to kind of reinforce those skills? The one you just talked about having them annotate and giving them something, I'm starting to think about some little assignments like if you would have them do that. But do you have any other suggestions to accomplish that?
Yeah, what types of reading do they do in math?
Basically, it's mostly short stuff. So I'm thinking like in a word problem or a paragraph or kind of story problem, whatever you want to call it. But they have to go in, they have to pull out the information, they have to organize that information and decide and say a method of solution for the situation.
I mean, I might encourage, and you guys can jump in.
Yeah.
I might encourage them to remember sort of how paragraphs are structured. So that there probably will be a topic sentence to the word problem that will give it some context.
Right.
And kind of use some examples to break down the word problems in terms of sentence structure to begin, so that they're making sure that they're understanding the details that are supporting the larger paragraph,
Right.
and that the writing is done effectively. And also, if you have a word problem that's really poorly constructed in English,
Yes.
reword it, right, for your test. I think that's an important thing too. I mean, sometimes
as an instructor,
as an instructor if you can, or you can do that with the class,
Right.
because you're really trying to, when people are reading, they're trying to get a sense of what the author is saying to them, and they're activating their prior knowledge on that topic. And so if they feel like they don't have any prior knowledge about the word problem, they might automatically have their test anxiety through the roof, because
Right.
they don't even understand the concept
Yep.
of what you're trying to say. So if you can just work with them on the strategies of saying, take your time. I'm always saying, look at the prompt or the question, read it, reread it, maybe read it again, monitor your comprehension at the end and make sure you really understood what you read. And then any words that you're not sure, use your context clues. So have them look at the sentence and see what don't they use in the context of the sentence. Can they kind of make sense of what a definition may be? Do you let them use dictionaries?
No one's ever asked. If they ask, I'd say yes. Because I don't, at least as far as like exams or homework, if you don't understand, ask, right? That's always the. So I would if someone had ever expressed that, but they tend to not realize that the English skills are embedded in the math.
Right,
It's a
they
math
don't
class.
transfer those.
Right, they don't transfer, right? So no one, I think, has ever thought about asking for a dictionary, because who would ask for a dictionary in a math class, right? So,
I would think even ESL students, that would be a given. that-
Yeah.
oh, there are, I do take that back. I haven't had a couple of ESL students ask for like translation dictionaries and stuff. Never have a problem with that.
And you would be surprised though too, with this type of population, because I'm teaching a 101S course, there's some overlapping types of students I have, that words that you might think are understandable and you grasp them. I had a student, they're reading an essay, they read an essay by Michael Pollan called The Animals Practicing Complexity. And I had one of my students, after we had been discussing the essay for a few classes, asked me to explain complexity. Right? And we had been describing complexity and talking about complexity. So if you have a math problem for that student that says, such and such is a complex issue, right? They might not have any conceptual grasp
Of the language.
concept it is.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so like I don't teach English, I don't pretend to really, know exactly what your strategies are all about there, but even our specific problem tends to be the ESL students, because in order to pass, they have to be able to interpret language. And they have to be able to interpret phrases. And the things that would not occur to me that would be problematic are sometimes problematic. Things like not understanding what a flight of stairs is. Because that's in English, and we all take for granted that people know what that is. But that has tripped people up, that particular phrase, and other things even, so just.
Well, first I think we can chat a little bit about why those students are getting into your classes so underprepared. And a lot of it has to do with the sequencing and the resources. We don't have a writing center that's really equipped to deal with language acquisition in that way. We don't have tutors who are trained to teach English specifically for people of all different various languages and different motivation types. And so they're leaving the 063, and again, we have some times where people are thinking really critically, and you think they're good students, and they're moving along, and their reading skills aren't really up to speed. And then when we're in the developmental classes, we don't have the time to cover those things. So we often end up with students, and this is what tends to happen, and this is a huge problem we have to address with the writing center in general, is the students who are really well motivated, so they're able to do drafts, and this is the big problematic piece with our curriculum. They're able to do drafts, and the ESOL students will rewrite a draft 12 times, and they'll end up with an A on it. But if you look at what they can do in their own timed writing, it's nothing like what they hand in the draft. And if you look at the drafts, they're edited in all different handwriting by all different types of people. And it's difficult to build a portfolio class that's built on revision and then tell the students, please don't revise, because they're very motivated to get A's.
Right.
Like the A is what they want. And I don't know how to slow that down. We do the exit exam. We encourage people, to not let that happen. But really, so we need a more comprehensive ESOL program. We need more comprehensive reading strategies than what we have. We only have so many resources, and most of those things are solved outside of class with the tutoring, and we don't have enough of a tutoring budget and things.
Is there any possibility of building onto the ESL so that they go up to a higher level?
Well, we discuss that all the time, and it all comes down to dollars and cents, really. I mean, Middlesex completely cut their entire ESOL program. It's gone. They have nothing, no ESOL classes at all. So for us to try to expand it in this economic climate
There are
is...
no students in here,
Right,
right?
exactly. So a couple of things that you guys can do, and I know, we have to sort of move into the space of what do we do once they're there, and we're doing everything we can from the English side to try to beg people, honestly, to not pass people who are underprepared. But if they get through, because maybe they say, I don't want to spend the time at ESOL, I want to go right into this class. And they often place in the AccuPlacer are higher than they really need to be, because we don't have the funding to give Right Placer to everyone. But what you can do is from the very beginning, encourage those students to encourage the entire class to be a committed group of learners together, where everybody is helping one another try to talk about things in a way that represents correct English. So if the classmates hear the student not understand something or look confused, ask them to sort of slow down and repeat it. Try to get the students who are not native speakers to talk a lot in class, and to ask you guys after class to just say, can you please tell me after class, raise your hand if I'm in the middle of lecturing and you don't understand a word, please raise your hand and ask me. And then take a minute or two. You'd be so surprised how effective this is if you just take a minute or two to write on the board the word the student doesn't understand, put it in context, and then ask the rest of the students in class to explain to them the connotation and the denotation of the word so that the student can see how it's used. And because oftentimes the students will joke. I had a student just the other day, and she said, what do you mean by word form? My word forms are problematic. And I said, well, you shift tense, there's subject verb agreement problems. And she goes, oh, my Chinglish? And and honestly, like, they have a good sense of humor about what they know, that they're not exactly sure what the phrases are. But the people in the class are such an asset to teach those students English. And oftentimes, if you look at the personality types and the cultural expectations of the students, they don't feel comfortable interacting, and they don't feel comfortable asking. And if somebody had just said, or if you guys know, for example, that flight of stairs is going to trip them up, or an Asian student not knowing what a pizza pie is or something like that, and you know those are on some of your tests, you can bring them up in discussion and say, what do you guys do if you're facing these things? And just try to move away from the sense of, the student's not prepared, like it's just too complicated, what do I do to them? And look at the whole class as a sort of cultural group of learners. And it just shift that paradigm a little bit, and I think that could help.
I think that's huge, and it's particularly in some courses that you probably teach, you're rushed to cover content, things like that, but I think it's important, what I try to do is to model for the entire class, because I do have a couple of students in one particular class who are not native speakers. They're kind of shy, they're very intelligent, and I know they're doing the work and critically thinking, but I specifically call on them, knowing though that everyone needs to be quiet. I need to strain to hear what they're saying. I look at them to make sure, and then I repeat back to them. So if I understand correctly, you just said, right? And I have 2 students in that class who, same thing, both quiet. But the other students in class see that. And so, you know, where normally people would kind of get impatient or distracted, you know, I model for them the kind of interaction I want them to have with those students as well. So, I think that's very
And, Terry, what is the overall sense with the faculty in the nursing department? Like, what are the big frustrations? Is it the speaking or the writing or both?
Well, in clinical, it's problematic in both.
Okay.
You know, in class, in the theory portion, it's how they're interpreting what they're reading, because of course you can't pass a test if you don't understand the questions and the answers correctly, so that you can make appropriate choices. So I think in that respect, it's are they getting as much out of the reading as they should be? But sometimes it's even just having them understand what we're saying. You know, sometimes it's just, and like you say, most of them are very intelligent and very hard workers. You know, so it's hard for them to ask for help. And you may not recognize how much trouble they're in right away because they don't come to you and talk about it. You know, so now you're already 3 exams in before you know how big the problem is, you know.
And sometimes at that point, I mean, that's what happens to us.
It's hard to catch them back.
You
It's
get
hard to bring them back.
Either you can't get them back, or, you know, the amount of work that we required, it's just not, you know, it's not feasible at that point in
Yeah.
time. You know, so yeah, by the time they come to you, it's too late.
It really is. It's very hard.
Well, just from a practical perspective, I mean, there are divides among departments, which we all know about. There's divides where there are people who say, I'm only teaching my content area and that's all I'm paid for. And then the divide that teaches, the other side that teaches like the whole student and the whole developmental pedagogy and all those things. So in the nursing department is the culture more of, we have so much to get through, we don't have the time to be teaching.
Well, there
this sort
is
of-
that, but, you know, it's kind of by the time they come to us, that developmental portion
Mhm.
is, because they've already gone through English 101, they've already gone through math 137. So by the time they get to us, our expectation is that they can meet this certain criteria, because we have to take their thinking so much farther
Right.
that there is no time for this other piece.
So.
You know, and when you're grading their clinical paperwork, to spend time on grammar instead of on the critical thinking portion of things, it's crazy.
Because I think what we have to do collectively as a college is look at the resources. I mean, really what's happening here is the students who are getting into your class with those troubles somehow got through the programs without getting their learning needs met. And they somehow got through composition and got a good enough grade to get into nursing. So what we have to figure out is how is that happening? Well, I can tell you, there are 9 English department faculty, and right, and there are, what do we have, 5,000 students? And everyone
Right.
takes English, right?
Right.
And then we have 1 librarian. So none of my night classes get library instruction, and we have mostly peer tutors in the writing center. And that's what we have. And so when you look at the amount of oversight that the burden on the math and the English departments to oversee this many people, that's why these
Crazy.
things tend to happen.
Yeah.
And the shadowing of courses and not knowing who's teaching till the last minute and then the legislative changes, et cetera. So I think the short-term thing, and I don't know what you guys think of this, might be if we can somehow code and banner who the nursing students are to provide an additional level of exit strategy out of 101. That might be a short-term fix to make sure that instructors are being mindful of that or something. I don't know. I'm not one for testing really, but I'm just wondering like if
Even just to give us some helpful suggestions for how to support these people through, because, you know, they have 2 short years and they're out taking care of people.
I have a
They're
suggestion.
out, they're out there.
But I don't know, we had talked about it at the last conference we were at. You know, I also work in student services, and we offer workshops, that sort of thing. And we're looking to tailor make our workshops to better meet the need of students. So we want to front load the workshops in the fall semester. Instead of offering them around midterm, we want to offer them at the very beginning of the semester. But then the problem we come into is a lot of our students, they have just enough time to get here, take their class, and they're out.
Yeah.
We'd like to offer workshops very specifically. We could offer an annotating workshop outlining, idioms, colloquialism, that sort of thing. But I don't really know if our students are going to be able to take that extra 45 minutes to come to a workshop. You all would have to let us know. I mean, we're probably going to try it anyway in the fall, but historically, our attendance in workshops, if it's not directly tied to careers and jobs, or not even the major, if it's not connected to a job or a career, the attendance is usually 3 students.
So how do we, it seems, at least from the math side, from the public community, that a lot of what's happening is, I don't want to use this phrase, but we're outsourcing our information, right? So what we used to be able to do in class, we can't do in class anymore, right? We don't have the time, we don't have the resources to do that. So now it becomes outsourced. Now it's dependent on the student to pick up some of that information that we used to be able to provide in class. But they still think all I have to do is come to class to get all the
Yes.
information.
Yes.
That's right.
And they
Right?
don't know
And
that
so-
they don't know
and-
these
right,
things.
and
Right.
right,
That's it.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's.
They don't recognize that
Yeah.
that's directed at them.
Don't know
Right,
that
and
these
so
are.
Because they don't know why they need to know that.
Yeah.
Why do I have to
Why
go
do I-
to a
Yeah, what would be
workshop?
important about that for them?
Right, and so how do we change that kind of idea so that our attendance at our workshops that we know would help is
We
better
can
than
offer
for
day,
students?
evening, but we just have to know,
Well,
are your
And
students
even
going to
then, are
come?
they gonna come, right? Because, same thing, we'll do calculator workshops at all various days and times, and we still only get a couple of students.
You get
right?
the same numbers?
It's the same, yeah, exactly, it's the
One
same
to two
thing,
students.
And it's
people
the
go, "Oh,
same
I'm going for
people,
one."
it's the ones that are motivated, that have that insight to know that they need it,
Right. Or
instead of the ones who really don't recognize.
we always end up saying the ones who don't need it are the ones who show up,
Yeah, right, exactly.
right? So, but I don't know how to change that perception or idea amongst the students that, I did have a question about a larger, like what C said, all the colleges are doing something different. Do you have any preliminary information on what other colleges are doing and any more or less effective, what kind of things that they've got?
We're the only college that's doing information literacy. So the fact that we have an annotated bibliography and source material and directly quoting and paraphrasing, we're sort of it in the system. Everyone else is doing sort of textual analysis in these classes, and they're slowing it down. So that for them, the jump between developmental to comp is much bigger than our jump. We really designed the course for the students who are going to go into comp so it can be much more seamless for them. And people, it's sort of, the populations are so incredibly different. It's really hard to tell. I made it Capital. It's so different than in Agawam Valley.
Right.
So
Yeah.
everybody, the cut scores are different. So what CSET attempted to do was align all of our materials and then do a large scale assessment. And then we asked if we could do that because they said they wanted commonality, but then they wouldn't fund it.
Right.
And then when we did give them common placement scores and they realized the dollars and cents of what that would mean to do it right, they said, no, we're not accepting your placement recommendations. So what kept happening was CSET was being proactive We would give them information and ask them questions. We wouldn't get an answer on funding, and then it all sort of got dismantled. So, but what I can tell you is that we are running a workshop or a conference at Middlesex on May 2nd, and we're bringing in representatives from every college, and we're giving our lesson plans and our pilots and successes and weaknesses, failures, and we're talking about the non-cognitive affective things, and we're doing presentations and small group discussions so teachers can talk about innovations in teaching, and we're going to give everyone a packet of materials so everyone can see what every school's doing and what worked and what didn't work. But they sort of extended the pilots for 2 more years, and that's what I've heard, and everything's in flux. So I don't know exactly. I just know that everyone's kind of treading water right now, and I think that the reason I wanted to have these discussions is I don't think people are really going to see the fallout until 1.5 years from now, when the full scope is opening in the fall, and then those students don't pass after a couple semesters, and the ones who move on who are underprepared, and what the impact is. Because Joe also is in charge of English composition, so he has to get all of his many adjuncts to understand not to move students on when they're not ready and what that means. I can give you a quick example. I had a student who got a C- in my English 100 class, and then got an A in college composition. So,
Learned a lot.
right, so it was, you got a C- in my class, got a B- in the next class, and then got an A in college composition. So it was just it's just interesting to look at that, like what does that
really mean?
Right.
Right, and I often have students who are advisees who will say, because everyone thinks my classes are pretty hard, and they are, right? But they'll say, your English 100 was harder than my comp class, or why did this happen, or just looking at resources and oversight. So.
And I think to echo back on a couple of things that kind of overlap with this is, we were mentioning the frustration that students may have having to go through the sequence again. And I have, you probably have students too in your courses who are like, well, how come I just can't get better than a C or B, right, or whatever it is. And I think it's important as faculty to kind of, not model this, but talk to the students about, what it means to progress and become a better writer or thinker, right? It doesn't happen just in the span of 15 weeks. And this is important for faculty in other disciplines, in my view, about English comp, right? We're not looking at the mechanistic model where they're going to be fixed as writers or thinkers in an academic context after 15 weeks. It's a progress, right? So it's finding where that cutoff should be for those students to move on to the next thing. What is the acceptable place for them to be to move to the next level?
And then at the other schools, many schools have 2 levels of composition. They have comp and then an advanced comp, and then they have a 2-sequence comp sequence. We have comp and then lit and comp. So we have to really get students prepped, because our students who go on to 4-year schools are getting 1 semester of composition theory. The students at the 4-year schools got comp, 2 semesters of comp, and then usually 2 semesters of literature. So they're writing against students that have all that background when they go to their 4-year programs, and that's why we felt like we had to make the rigor of this course so intense. But I just 2 quick things. I want to follow up with you after this about looking at some of your word problems and kind of telling sort of what I would say to the class, if that would help. I'd love to do that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, great. And then secondly, with nursing, I was just thinking that how would your nursing faculty feel about doing some type of diagnostic entrance essay with the students? Just like 30 minutes first day, a couple paragraphs, and then maybe asking the ESOL person who's in charge of David to do a task force where you guys tried for a couple semesters where the essays that are in question now, because you can skim and scan through an essay quickly and know who the ESOL, where the ESOL issues are, and then maybe David could work with Deirdre and other faculty, and the students can just be sort of told at the beginning, we identified through your diagnostic essay that you could benefit from these workshops, and if you have the dates set up, and they can go together as a team of students from the nursing classes, then they can build community as well. I mean, just as a suggestion to kind of.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
Now, would it be optional? In other words, you're letting them know that we would recommend, we would advise? 'Cause
I don't know if we can make it mandatory.
Yeah, I mean.
I don't know if we can.
But even making it optional.
We can make it strongly suggested.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's up to them. And then this way, they have the knowledge, they have the resources, our workshops, what we did, and then it's up to them at that point.
I mean, it's just something, it's so easy with the diagnostic essays to go through them and you can tell after the first paragraph if someone's struggling with certain skills.
Well, yeah, I mean, we can tell just, we wouldn't even have to do a diagnostic essay,
Uh-huh.
just pull their paperwork from the clinical setting and
That's true.
you can see their writings. I mean, it's glaringly obvious. But even, it would be nice for me even to understand what would be helpful for that population, what would be helpful for me to refer to, because I'm not an English professor, and, so what would help that student? I don't know,
This is a little bit, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, this is a little bit unrelated in that it's not so much the writing, it's the speech. And I've heard in the past that it's been an issue with the accent.
Yes.
And so there are, in fact, websites that students can work with on their own
Right.
to help them to speak in a manner
More
that's
clearly.
more comprehensible to the native English-speaking population.
Right.
And the other thing I found when I have taught developmental, I've had ESOL students, I love the Penguin Handbook. In the back of the Penguin Handbook, they have a section specifically for, non-native speaking students. And I've used that section, because you only had so much time.
Yeah.
But I would work with that group and just really, go through that section, study that section. There are, questions, answers. And so that might be an option as well that we could use, of course, we'd have
It
to
just
take a look
seems
and
like,
see.
yeah,
It's,
and we are, I think our faculty feels underprepared to deal with how to further help them. And the workload is so huge already that it's really hard to, mandate more things to put on their plate.
Yeah.
And they did pass 101, and they did pass 137. So
why do I have to go to this workshop?
exactly right.
When that other student doesn't, and
It just, there's a lot of challenges related to that, so, and I don't know what the right answer is, because again, I feel underprepared to deal with that particular problem.
And I think that if the nursing faculty can have a broader understanding of why some of these students get through and how that happens due to lack of resources and oversight and things that occur, and students revising drafts and having to revise when it's not a student, and what you do about that, that might be a good starting point discussion. But there are a lot of things that you guys can do, and I know you formed a task force with David Rutherford, an ESOL task force through nursing. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But
it's something we're talking about now.
But even if you had for your first day of class and you had some assignments that you were giving out, you could even ask the ESOL students to take maybe, you might maybe just with all the students, say, please read through this in class and give them 45 minutes to read something in class and circle every word you don't know. And you could just do sort of a vocabulary thing with people, because I'm sure there's other nursing language that holds people up. And you could say, we're going to be challenged with different medical terms, we're going to be challenged with language terms, and all questions are good questions. Let's embrace an environment where we are entering into points of view instead of debating issues, where we're thinking about language in a way that's helpful for everyone. My nurse is my sister-in-law is a nurse at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and she works in the NICU with the babies, and she had a nurse who had an ESL issue, and she spelled pussy wrong all the time. I won't tell you what she wrote, but it was very problematic. Right? So you want to make sure that these people aren't writing these things on charts that.
Well, and they are.
And they are. I mean, what does that mean? But it's so the long story short is, and I'm sure you'll agree, the only way the students will get better, and that's our goal, is if they have confidence that the people around them will help them understand the culture and understand the language, and that they feel like they have a voice to ask for those concerns. And if you guys can look at your own materials that you're handing out and skim and scan it for cultural bias in the way things are worded, and let them know some things that
Which
are
we
happening.
are trying to do. That's how we're finding out about, flight of stairs.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
But oftentimes, it's not something that jumps out at you.
no.
Mhm.
his flight of stairs did not jump out at us, right? So, you know, you find out after the fact, and then you correct it after the fact, but.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, it's not an overwhelming, I mean, it doesn't have to be an overwhelming thing. We think it's an overwhelming thing. But just getting the faculty members to realize there's a difference. And that's it. As soon as you take that step, that these are not the same students as that, then you start looking at things a little bit differently. And you do the small things, and
So
they
again,
actually
that's
make, and they make a
where
little
we are in
difference.
the process.
And even with, you know, we have this in English, okay? We have some folks who teach the higher level classes and they do not want to be bothered with the developmental students at all. And so there's a rigidity to their thinking that comes across in tone and body language to the students also, which can shut people down, I think. So if people can be a little bit more receptive to say, it is what it is, our goal is to help the students, our goal is to help the patients down the road, can we just try to think of it in a way where we're more inclusive instead of exclusive, and we're using our resources, and we're understanding all of the challenges we have. As a community in this college, communicating, I think we'll all be better off, and I just think that these dialogues have to continue on a larger scale. We don't know where else to go.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
I guess we'll see. Okay. Thanks.